all, thank you so much for having me on board. It's a privilege to be a part of you all, especially in such unprecedented times. We are all going through a very rough phase in our lives. Myself, along with my students, we have been through very difficult times. We are still going through difficult times, and I feel that it is very important to develop this kind of communities. Probably we dissociated ourselves from the idea of community with which storytelling is so closely associated with. Before beginning my deliberation, I would like to congratulate all my senior colleagues. I would pay my respect to Honorable Principal Sir and all my colleagues present here today. And I thank you all for inviting me here. And I'm glad that our students are part of this endeavor because they are our future. I've always felt the significance of the Acharya uh, in inculcating ideas of reading, inculcating ideas of an alternative lifestyle as part of the Santiniketan ashram, because we are an extension of the ashrama life which our founder Rabindranath Tagore had always felt that it is a sense of community that could keep us alive. So even in this digital world, when we are in touch with our students, when we are delivering lectures, what we felt was significant in these interactions, was the idea of community. Because for me, Shantiniketan is a community because it's a residential university where the dream was that we are going to live a collective life. So what do we mean by this collective? How do we associate uh, our ideas of forming a community? It's through stories. So when I got this invitation to address my students, my beloved students, because we are nothing without you all. Without students, I don't feel that our institutions are alive because as teachers, as educators, we could just facilitate a process. We learn with our students. So I think that this inauguration of the Reader Club will not only cater to idea of readerships in this new world, in this new space, the digital space, it will also create an awareness of community, club. So it's not social distancing, but physical distancing which we are combating right now. So how do we connect that? How is it possible to connect that? I feel that to embark on something new when we talk about the digital world or when we are thinking of this inauguration, knowing fully well that we are not aware when we are going to be there out physically in classes, in clubs, in gatherings, social gatherings. These initiatives will be remembered by history, that what we did as human beings. Because some very important points came up. And I was so happy that Panikkar was mentioned here. Uh, our my senior colleagues mentioned about problems of reading culture which we are facing now, and of course the significance of stress, how stress is overpowering our existence. So how can readership take care of all these challenges? Now, when we think of adopting certain methods, certain tools of addressing challenges, addressing issues for which we were not prepared, we probably need to go back. And this is primarily what my ideas will revolve around this evening. I must say that my idea was never to give an academic lecture which we are used to uh, in the big academic fora. Because the essence is storytelling, I felt that it would be important for us to trace back that history of storytelling. So, though the title talks about historicizing, I'm not going to theorize anything here this evening because we are already overburdened with knowledge. My idea is to tell a story to you all. And I should say that this, a couple of slides that I would be showing, or you probably need not have the slides also. Those are actually for me, for my reference. I've shared those slides so that you could refer to when you want to later, at a later stage. As I'm honored that I was introduced by my colleagues, I should say that I have always balanced my anxieties in life because I've never just identified myself as an academician. Though I was trained as an academician, but I was also simultaneously trained in Indian art forms since the age of 3. So parallelly, I was trained to become a performer, and then later I realized that all us, we teachers, we are great performers actually. Our classes are performances. We actually tell stories in classes. And we should recollect, we should remember that all these stories, when collected and presented, people remember, people remember these stories forever. To share an anecdote, we all know that Aristotle never wrote his poetics. He was actually talking about aesthetics and his students who were part of a larger reading culture that existed in the Greco-Roman traditions. They documented these stories, and we know that that has become a marker of understanding Western aesthetics. So, with this hope, I would say what I'm trying to present this evening, I will just try to elaborate a couple of points. If I have a friend, can show the slide actually, just for your reference. You need not concentrate on the slide. So let us trace a journey. Can I have the slide, please?
Ashwin Sadish.
It's not a problem. I can talk also. If you don't have the slide, no issues. It's not important. Oh, thank you so much. It's there. It's absolutely okay. Thank you so much. Can we have the slides show?
Ashwin, please keep the slide in landscape mode.
Or you can go to the slideshow mode.
Jai Krishna Okele.
You may
You,
please just click the slideshow.
it's not an issue. Do not worry. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So if you look at the title, it's interesting that when I was drafting this, drafting my thoughts actually for this presentation, I felt that I should acknowledge my connection with Kerala as a performer, as a student of theatre. I just completed a month-long Kudiyattam training. I was introduced to Kudiyattam long back, I would say, 7 years back. And later by one of our famous directors, Manish Mitra. And then right now, my Guruji, Rajnish Chakiar. And I felt that when we are talking about readership, when we are talking about storytelling in the digital world, what best way than to acknowledge what we had in us, in our own culture? And Kerala, being one of the flag bearers of our Indian cultural ethos, Kudiyattam, the form which developed, already had something called Koothu, the Koothu tradition, the Chakiar Koothu tradition, where people communicated with each other. The stories were the traditional Kudiyattam borrowed stories from the epics, but also there was the Koothu tradition, where people talked about everyday politics, people talked about their ways of lives in their local dialect. So, when we talk about readership, what we really need to understand is the significance of our linguistic diversity, the significance of our land, which is a land of stories. So, to talk about storytelling as an art form, I would say, if we look at our traditional performances, they were all aimed at telling stories through the proper articulation of the mind, the body, which would then touch the soul, which Sir had just rightly pointed out, that the coordination of the mind, body, and soul. So when we talked about rasa nispatti, we have to understand that that is essentially personal experience. So when we talk about readership, I feel that we need to first acknowledge, first trace this history of listening, watching, the visual culture that we had, the culture of the Sravya Kavya and the Drisya Kavya. We had a strong culture which was probably not similar to the world of readership as we understand today. But then definitely, if we have that base clear, then probably it would be easier for us to adapt this new reality. So my second point of the act of listening, act of performing, is closely associated with uh, what you are trying to intend right now, developing a reading community. If we look at our traditional performances with the hastas, with the mudras, with the dialects, for example, Manipraval in your part of the country. So people communicated in their local dialects. They spoke not dialect, that is not a wrong term, that is not a right term actually, I would say language. They spoke in their local languages to communicate with each other. How did they communicate it? So we had traditional storytellers in all these communities who transmitted knowledge. So stories are associated with knowledge. What kind of knowledge? Each and every language is a knowledge system. If we look back, if we trace the history of Malayalam, we know that it is deeply rooted in the land. The story of the land is associated with the language and any art form that is associated with the language. So when you communicate anything in your own language, I emphasize the significance of the mother tongue. You actually form a community. You actually form a linguistic community. You form a semiotic community where each and everybody would understand each other. It requires a kind of participation. It requires a kind of understanding what is being tried to, what the other person is trying to communicate. This would also mean stories associated with traditional medicine, local art forms, survival strategies. Now, we have to understand that long before we talk about the colonization, the impact of the Western cultures, we have to understand that India came in contact with several cultures over centuries. So we constantly came in touch with the outer world. So stories came from outside, and stories from this part of the world went outside. We are aware of the migration of tales that happened. Our Panchatantra, our Aesop's fable, everything is associated with this migration of tales. So when people came for trade, I'm deliberately emphasizing this because You all are aware because of the part which you inhabit, the part of India which you inhabit, was colonized. And with the colonizers, with the Portuguese, with the Danish from where I belong to, or with the French, I belong to a land which was colonized both by the Danish people and the French people, later the English people. So we are all full of stories. Our existence, our body, our languages, our skin tones, the food we eat are all stories. So long before we had ideas of readership, which I will come to later, which talks about a specific cultural intervention. We had a storytelling tradition, which is very important for us to engage with at this point. We were not always a part of printed tradition, because normally we associate readership with printed texts. Our culture is just not a print culture. If we do so, then we are not acknowledging the diversity. We are not acknowledging all the languages in which we do not have publications. Languages are performed. Performance has its own language. So what about all those people who do not have texts published in their languages? Aren't they part of readership or anything associated with the concept of readership? So, to broaden the idea of readership, I have tried to historicize this. And hence, my title is From Koothu to Content. Content as in content in the digital world. And how do we see this transition? If we relate this transition, then probably it will be easier for us to formulate our understanding of a reader's club. Because we should not start with a point. We should start with a much broader horizon and then probably reach a point of existence, a point that will remain for the posterity to think about, to explore. We are all just minor dots in the path that I'm trying to trace. Now, it is very interesting that stories also meant documentation. For example, what we are doing right now, we are exchanging thoughts. If these are documented, this can be documented in form of a story also. You might go back home or you might just start a conversation at home by saying that we met someone today and then this happened. He was telling this. Remember one thing, consciously or unconsciously, you are being part of history making. So history is not just a discipline which is imposed from above on us. Because the moment we say history is separate from our existence, we fail to acknowledge that history is also storytelling. Histories are nothing but accounts of stories. Now, we do associate legitimacy, we do associate authenticity with history telling. And of course, when we talk about stories, we say that, okay, everything which is unattainable in historical time can be attained in stories. So stories are fabrication of the minds or that which can be, which we can say there is a difference between the historical truth and the poetic truth. But poetic truth does have truth in it. So any kind of conversation, any kind of story need not require legitimacy, need not require authenticity, need not be attested by any kind of authoritarian force to become history. Or rather, history needs all these attestations to become story. But remember, its story is there. History. Unfortunately, it's a story of exclusion. History does not document everyone because we are not used to accommodate alterities. But when we are telling stories, just think about our traditional forms where in a village we all sat together, or in an ashrama where the guru was there at the center and all the disciples listened. So inculcating the tradition of listening, Shruti, remembering, understanding, and then passing it again through stories. So our idea of itihasa is actually a narrative which probably or which might not have any kind of continuity. We do not have the burden of continuity because it is the importance of story. Because if you remember the way our grandfathers and our grandmothers told stories, the next day they would probably begin again to reiterate, or what we call in the digital world a knowledge check of whatever we could recollect from the stories which were told to us the previous day. Now it is very interesting that now I'm talking about verbal words, spoken words. But our Indian tradition did believe in articulation and gesticulations as well. So all our traditional dance forms, many dance forms in our southern part of India, had codified, had replaced the spoken words with the gestures, the mudras, the hastas, the padavedas. So the people who came to enjoy these performances were actually well versed in the language of performance. So probably that was also a kind of club, that was also a kind of readership, maybe not written at all, maybe a performed culture, a performance culture, where texts were performed, texts were not written. Or maybe there was an Ur text, Ur in German means the original text. We all know that the Ramayana, that the multiple variations of the Ramayana that we have in India, especially in southern part of India. We are all aware of Kamban and everyone, Kamban Ramayana and other variations of the Ramayana. So when people belong to a particular culture, they somehow associated with a particular text without even reading it, just listening to it, just through acts of remembrance. So when I'll come to it later when I talk about the theme. So we have to understand that the transition from the oral to the written culture, which we are now concerned with and which has again shifted. All this while we felt that it was important to publish ourselves in print so that it is preserved for posterity. It is very unfortunate that in a country like ours, we became so dependent on print and written. Because even if we have a written text, there are multiple variations, even by the same author. Because that is who we are. Because we are not moving toward a particular telos. As a culture, our idea of time is so different from the idea of print culture. The time that is the time and space that we associate with a print culture. But we embraced that form. We have all embraced it. I personally am a product of the printed reading culture. But with this awareness that this is specifically not the only thing available in our tradition. Our tradition is much, 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 much wider. Its scope is much more wider. Hence, our stories are to be performed, to be remembered. But we know that this transition happened from the oral to the written culture. What happened later? So orality, the art of storytelling, did exist in multiple forms. To give you an idea, the slide title is Shifting Desires, Technologizing the Spoken Words. So what we have done, we have already used technology for our spoken words to somehow retain that flavor. If you remember, you are much, much more well informed than I am. Chandu Menon, in his idea on formulating Indulekha, wanted to give this flavor, the flavor of a form which was not known to us exactly, that is the novel form, novel. But we had a long history of storytelling tradition in our country. As I said, Koothu maybe from your area, Katha in other traditions, Akhaika, Akhanam in other places. So we had idea of storytelling, but when the form of novel came to us as a genre, that created a readership, but we have to understand the way the novel originated in the West and the way the novel was created here, was fabricated here, was published here for circulation. It is embedded in our cultural ethos. Hence, we have so many variations of upanyas, novel katha, even kadambari. So there are multiple options of how we associate storytelling, how we associate readership, but all are embedded in our storytelling tradition. We already have that. We already had that. So what happens then? When I'm telling story, someone who is used to Koothu, someone who is used to Ramakatha, someone who is used to Yakshagana, someone who is used to the Maharis, the songs and the dance of the Maharis, they all are part of readership, which do not fit into the Western concept of reader text, textuality. We already had ideas of texts, we already had ideas of readerships, but not identical with what we understand by readership these days. So what we are now part of is a part of a mercantile storytelling, a part of mechanical representation, reproduction, to quote Benjamin, because we are trying to increase the number of readership. We are trying to outreach. We are trying to think of the market. So readership is now closely associated with the marketplace economy. Books are part of our existence because they are also doing a kind of market survey. Not just now. As good as the advent of the printing culture, books became significant products which could be delivered, which could be preserved, which were knowledge systems. And remember one thing, that all this would also entail an understanding of genres. So when I tell readership, what kind of readership am I talking about? Am I talking about a person who is equally fond of poems, novels, essays, short stories, novella, memoirs? Are these all similar readerships? There might be overlaps. There might be interfaces. But remember one thing, that we probably tend to formulate everything for our own sake under the heading of readership. Probably I'm hinting at the multiple layers of readership which we need to address. The moment we do that, we can move ahead. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yes, the shifting space, which I say, because of the shifting images. The moment I talk about readership, which is associated with a printing culture, and in this digital world, what happened is that when I read novels, English novels, in my undergrad years, way back in late 90s, when many of our students are probably just born or not born also, our students here present here. When I'm reading an English novel, the geography, the immediate description of heath in Hardy's novels, these are not my reality at all. So I was continuously shifting the space and I was reimagining the landscape. For me, Eustacia Y was full of mystery, a mysterious woman standing in a heath. Now, what is a heath? So what we do is that we continuously replace our understanding with that. The act of translation, the act of transmission, it happens. So when I read a novel, I still have that habit of continuously painting something. So this is my notebook, and I keep painting. I even painted the figure of Eustacia Y. But remember one thing, that imagination is now being replaced with the coexistence of the visual, as if to facilitate our understanding. In the process of facilitating readership, it is somehow taking away imagination from us, which probably again Rabindranath Tagore had talked about long back in the 1902, that when we are replicating any Western model, for example, when we were replicating the Western stage, we were continuously talking about we were adopting elaborate sets, we were continuously bringing in images of a tree here and a furniture there. Rabindranath would say, what happens to the imagination of the reader? What happens to the imagination of the viewer? Did Kalidasa ever have to bother about the description of Kanva's ashrama, where he had to bring a cardboard tree and a cardboard heart to represent ashrama? No. It was there in the mind of the audience, the reader. So we need to understand the importance of creating, nurturing the reader. The reader is just not born like it is born in the printed culture. You print a book and you think the reader is born. No, it is not that easy. Then there will be theories of evoking the death of the author to talk about the birth of the reader, because we have replaced something which was not a logical progression of our existence, but probably a mechanical way of transmitting knowledge system. Now, when we say that, with what I started, our storytelling tradition deeply emphasized on memory, cognition. So when I say memory, machine, and more, I'm talking about the shift of the story which was there in my mind with the content which it has now become. There is a story in an advertisement also. There is a story in a matchbox. There is a story in the billboards. There are stories in the graffitis on the wall. People communicate their ideas through their graffitis on the walls. I'm sure that most of our Indian cultures, they have stories associated with the rangolis that they give every morning. You have to be a part of that story also to know which rangoli or which alpana is suitable for which festivity to invoke which god or goddesses. So we are part of a community. If not a printed community, but an oral community, a storytelling community. Now with all this, when we enter into generating content, when we write, when we put things on paper also, when we are writing a novel also, we remember one thing, what we do is that we tell our stories of existence. We tell our everyday lives, we talk about existence, our existence, which might also evoke existence beyond this. It could be beyond this, the metaphysical also. I'm not going into this terrain. So what happens when there is a remarkable shift from the storytelling tradition which we had to the content, and especially when it is on the digital space? Probably what happens is we find new narrators coming up. Even on our Facebook posts or on our Instagram handle or through our WhatsApp, we are actually continuously narrating things. Of course, the physical presence is absent, but somehow the digital space has created the new narrator, where there is a significant transition of the personal and the private and the public domain. We can easily talk about our anxieties. We can easily talk about our happiness. We can easily have our own readership. Just we need to formulate a content and just click. We now do not have to wait long to get published to have our own readership, which means this entire shift of space, the entire shift of images has also contributed in a significant change in readership, which is also associated with the authorship and censorship. Remember, content with the censorship of content that we face nowadays in the digital space has always been a part of any content or any words that was available out there for public consumption. Because you know that pen is definitely mightier than the sword. Readership can influence a society. As my senior colleagues have just rightly pointed out, that what is the purpose of life? What is the purpose of reading? What is the purpose of reading in a community? It can influence people to think in a different way. It can allow people to think about, justify things rationally and not just follow things. Because readership entails a kind of intellectual practice. So, when we talk about community activity, when we are talking about readership before the digital space, we know that there were columns in newspapers, there were dedicated spaces where people could communicate to the authors. Novels were being serialized. If a character died, there were severe protests from readers that you have to revive the character. We want that character back. But it took time. Definitely, there was the editor-in-chief who used to communicate that, because most of the greatest authors, even like Rabindranath Tagore, they were always catering to commissioned works for their livelihoods. People had a livelihood out of readers. So you were writing for readers, unlike today, where just like performers who are performing on the digital space, even the overburdening big data with too much of content out there, it's a very difficult task to retain loyal readership or even have a constant support of the readers, because they have too many options these days. So then definitely the idea of participation or negotiating with a particular text in the digital platform has definitely changed over the years. Because now you can directly go and post a comment. A comment can be edited immediately, but once a comment or any kind of criticism about a character or a book was published, it is still there for us to consume. It became then part of readership. It then became a part of the reception, because reception is closely associated with readership. Because there is a politics of reading, what we are reading, what we are allowed to read. Are we allowed to read everything? For example, when you are doing your readers club, you remember that there will be kind of screening of content, but there could be an open forum for discussing several contents. That is what is very important. It almost opens up our idea of the symposium that we are so familiar with in the Greek tradition, where people came together, minds came together, discussed things, talked about the state policies, talked about nation, nationality, state, everything. So readership is never apolitical. Readership has always been very selective. It talked about a culture, a reading practice. So when young minds are formulating a readers club, they probably need to understand the legacy that they are part of. They are not just part of a printed culture. They have this huge culture. And so probably that would also allow them to select the kind of texts that they want to introduce in their readers club. Now we have to understand that readership has changed because we now have audiobooks, we have apps like Storytel, we have podcasts catering the differently abled. Now this is one very important point. Isn't a reader a very privileged person, because buying books has always been difficult. Before, even after a tenure position, it is always difficult for us to buy original books. I still walk down the lanes, and if I walk down my memory lane also, I can remember that I've always procured books, second-hand, third-hand, fourth-hand books, or even have bribed people for books. Because readership is not that easy. Earlier, now it is, comparatively. Now books are published both in Kindle formats, and then of course, you have the tangible truth called book. I will come to it later. The emotional quotient associated with the book. I still associate myself with a readership, with a reading culture, which believed in smelling, taking the first smell of a book. The best gift that one could receive was books, be it during the Durga Puja, because I belong to a reading culture, the Bengali reading culture, which had several phases of publication. All the Bengali festivities were associated with publication of books, periodicals, specific publications during the Durga Pujas, which had translations, which talked about fashion, which talked about theatre, which talked about what we are going to read, what we are not going to read also, censorship also. So, this is replaced now with the audiobooks, the podcasts. So if I am embracing this, I am very much a part of podcasts, with this understanding that probably this readership will then cater to people who might not have the money to buy a book. But if I have enough data, then probably I will be able to listen to stories. I'm not talking that you can replace the physical presence of a book or actually the reading culture. But what about people, the differently abled people? Because I have friends who are differently abled, who have problem reading, but they were voracious reader. Once I have many of my teachers who lost their sight at the end of their years, at the end of their careers, and they had to have students to read aloud for them. So I feel that I'm not one person to discard any new progression that is happening, but we need to embrace something with the understanding of what we had. So if we are trading the next level, are we just completely erasing our previous existence? Or are we embracing the new normal, with this understanding that this is not a logical progression? This is something which we are negotiating with and having a respect for the reading culture that we already had. So then what you are planning, so reading or a readers club can be a kind of social activism, an outreach for the student community, for humanity in general, because these are very difficult times. Stories can connect us. We can formulate a community. by encouraging this kind of clubs, encouraging readership. So now, how can we, I'm being part of my students, how can we create content? How can we create readership for the digital space? I should say that I'm always indebted to my students because I teach a course on new media, and I learn from my young graduate students who continuously feed my knowledge systems with whatever is happening in the digital space. Now, the act of storytelling is now translated into the act of storyboarding, because people are using stories to communicate even knowledge of products. For example, I worked as an instructional designer for a private firm way back in 2005-6, where they used storytelling, which they call Stobel. They used stories of the Panchatantra to communicate geography lessons, or maybe an ERP module. So hardcore technical courses using stories for communication. All our advertisements that we see are nothing but stories. What we associate is the stories that we have in mind. So each and every product which is available in the USA or in India requires introducing that product in that reading culture, actually, because we are continuously thinking in terms of the sign, signifier, and the signified. What we are associating within those stories. So readership, the horizon of readership has been extended long, long before we entered the pandemic in March 2020. If we were not used to this, then probably it would have been very difficult for us to adopt. Now, is it possible then to think about the idea of entrepreneurship? Because we have young students here. Can storytelling be developed as skill? We talk about skill development. Can storytelling be a potential skill? Yes. The Kathakar or the Kathak that we had in our traditions, they were all professional storytellers. It's just that you might not have to paint your face and have a physical space to tell stories, but you can create your own readership. How? As I've said earlier, to talk about your memoir, to talk about your journey, to talk about your travelogue, you just need a blog or a vlog. And it's two shakes of a duck's tail. If you have a content ready, you already have a readership available there. Then you can connect with other readers. And the importance of the digital space is that you can have shared authorship. A novel can be started by one person, and there might be people who are engaging from several quarters of the world and then contributing meaningfully in writing a novel. It's like a collective entrepreneurship. Just like readers have changed, so have authorships. So with this, I should say that our young minds were thinking of a reading culture, reviving a reading culture, redefining a reading culture in this new normal, in this new space, which was there and which we are adopting to communicate our ideas. These were very basic ideas which I wanted to communicate with you all. With this understanding that there could be diverse ramifications, there could be several questions, conjectures associated with it. But this is what I had to share with you all. Thank you so much. Now I look forward to your comments, your suggestions, your queries. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.